The first person to accuse you isn't your enemy, it's your neighbor. Yesterday she borrowed salt from your kitchen. Today she won't look you in the eye. By sunset a child is dead. By morning they're calling you a witch. You do not know it yet, but the next accusation will not be the last, and each one will make the last look almost gentle by comparison. Before any of that, you were just a woman living an ordinary life in an ordinary village, somewhere in the German lands or the English countryside, in the middle of the 1600s, a century when crop failures, plague and religious war had already taught an entire continent to expect disaster around every corner. You are, let's say, a widow in your 50s, which already marks you in ways you don't fully realize. You have outlived a husband, and in an age when childbirth claimed the lives of many women, you have likely outlived at least one child too. You live alone, which here is not independence, it's suspicion waiting for a reason. Salt sits on your windowsill in a chipped clay bowl, the same bowl your mother used, the same bowl you have lent to half the village at one time or another over the years. In a world without refrigeration, salt is not a small thing to share. It preserves meat through winter. It seasons the only meal some families will get in a hard month. Lending it is one of the oldest gestures of trust a village has. You have never once refused anyone who knocked and asked. You gather herbs along the tree line in the early morning, the dew still cold on your ankles, sorting yarrow from feverfew by smell before the sun is fully up. You know which root eases a fever, and which poultice draws infection from a wound, knowledge passed down from your own mother, who learned it from hers. You have delivered half the Barbies born in this village in the last 20 years, your hand's the first thing many of your neighbors ever felt in this world. You bake bread every Thursday and share it without being asked, because that is simply what you have always done, and because a woman living alone survives on the goodwill of people who might one day decide they no longer owe her any. There is a young mother 2 houses down, Greta, whose first child you helped bring into the world screaming and healthy 3 winters ago. She still stops by most weeks, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to borrow a pinch of salt from that same chipped bowl, sometimes because her second child has a cough she wants your opinion on, before she spends money on the physician in the next town. You have watched her go from a frightened girl at her first labor to a steady young mother who trusts you with the thing she loves most in the world. Remember her, she matters later. This is the life you had. Hold on to it because it's about to become a weapon used against you. Here is the reward before the danger. For years, this quiet expertise made you valued. People walked 2 miles in bad weather to have you look at a sick child. Historians studying village life in this period have found that women like you, the local healer, the midwife, the herbalist, were often trusted more than the nearest physician, who was expensive, distant, and frequently useless anyway. You were, for most of your life, essential. That is exactly what makes what comes next so devastating. The year is 1627, and it has been a hard one. The harvest failed twice in a row. A wasting sickness has moved through the livestock, and now it has moved through the children. 3 of them, all under the age of 6, have died of a fever within the same fortnight it happens, that you were called to sit with the first child and could not save her. You do not know this yet, but grief in a village like this does not stay grief for long. It goes looking for a cause, and a cause is so much easier to bear than an accident. Here is the first dark reveal, and it is the one this whole century runs on. The real villain of this story was never magic. It was fear with nowhere else to go. A failed harvest that could not be explained by weather alone. Dead children who could not be explained by ordinary sickness alone. Religious anxiety, stoked for decades by Reformation and Counter-Reformation preachers, insisting that the devil moved openly among ordinary people. Local politics, where a land dispute or an old grudge could suddenly find a very convenient outlet. Grief, more than anything, looking for a face to put itself onto. Yours was simply the face standing closest. The whispers start small. Someone remembers that you were present the day the first child fell ill. Someone else remembers an argument, months ago, over a borrowed tool you never returned promptly enough. Someone's cow stopped giving milk the same week you walked past their field. None of this would matter on its own. Together, spoken low over evening fires, it starts to add up to something that feels, to frightened people, like a pattern. And then the cruelest detail arrives, the one you will replay for the rest of your life however long it lasts. It is Greta, the young mother whose first child you delivered, who first says your name out loud to the priest. Not out of malice, out of terror for her surviving children, and a desperate human need to believe that if she can just identify the danger, her own family might be spared. The last time she came to your door, She left the salt bowl on your step rather than knock. She will not meet your eyes again after that day. You understand in a way that makes the betrayal almost bearable that she is not your enemy either. She is simply afraid, the same as everyone else, and fear needed somewhere to point. And then, the twist that turns whispers into accusation. The local magistrate, under pressure from a bishop anxious to prove his diocese free of heresy, has just returned from a neighboring town where 11 women were tried and executed the previous winter. He is not looking for the truth. He is looking for confirmation that the danger has been found and dealt with. Your name reaches him within the week. Here is your second dark reveal. By this point in the 1600s, most European jurisdictions have adopted formal, almost bureaucratic procedures for identifying a witch, procedures that guarantee by design that almost no accused woman walks away innocent. You will be searched for a witch's mark, any mole, scar, or blemish on your body, which examiners are trained to find regardless of what is actually there. In parts of England, a self-styled witchfinder, paid handsomely per conviction, might subject you to the swimming test, bound and thrown into water, where floating was treated as proof of guilt and sinking, sometimes fatally, as proof of innocence you would never live to enjoy. You feel your hands shaking as 2 of the examiner's women pull back your sleeves in a cold stone room. Searching your skin inch by inch for a mark that was never anything more than a birthmark you've had since childhood, you try to answer their questions steadily, but you notice with a rising horror that there is no answer that helps you. Silence is treated as defiance, an explanation is treated as a rehearsed lie. Tears are treated as guilt trying to disguise itself as grief. Every single thing you say or do not say becomes, in their hands, another line of evidence against you. You are held in a cold cell for 11 days before anyone formally questions you. Sleep deprivation is not officially torture in the eyes of the court. It is simply watching, keeping the accused awake for days to wait for the devil's familiar to appear and betray her. Historians have found confession records from exactly this kind of interrogation, and the pattern is horribly consistent. After enough sleepless nights, exhausted and disoriented, women confessed to things that never happened, sometimes namming other women simply to make the questioning stop. Here is hope, and it matters, because it's also historically true. Not every accusation ended in a scaffold. In many regions, a significant share of women formerly accused of witchcraft were acquitted, released, or simply had the charges quietly dropped when local officials lost enthusiasm or a more sympathetic judge intervened. Some communities, especially as the century wore on, grew openly skeptical of accusations, and a small but growing number of skeptical clergymen and physicians began publishing arguments against the entire framework of the trials. You are not guaranteed the fire. You are only guaranteed the accusation, the fear, and the days you will never get back regardless of the verdict. But then the twist again, because your case is not one of the fortunate ones. Under questioning, exhausted past the point of coherent thought, you say something, you no longer remember exactly what that the court records as a confession. Once recorded, a confession under this system is treated as nearly impossible to retract. Retraction itself can be presented as further proof of the devil's influence, twisting your denial into evidence against you. Your trial, when it finally comes, lasts less than a single afternoon, in a room full of faces you have known your entire life. The village children who survived the fever are brought to testify, coached gently by frightened parents who need more than they need the truth, to believe the danger has finally been identified and removed. You recognize the miller, whose son you once treated for a burn. You recognize the priest who baptized half this room. None of them look at you the way they used to. The evidence against you is a birthmark, a dead cow, an old argument, and 11 days of exhaustion recorded as confession. It is, by the standards of 1627, more than enough. Here is the verdict, and it is the one delivered to tens of thousands of women across Europe during this century. Guilty. Estimates vary by region and record survival, but historians studying the period broadly agree that somewhere between 40 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft across Europe between the 1400s and the 1700s, with most of those executed being women, and the peak of the panic concentrated in exactly the decades you are living through now. What waits for you afterward is not always the same. In parts of the German lands, burning was the standard sentence. In England, hanging was more common. Either way, the sentence was carried out publicly, deliberately in front of the same neighbours who once walked 2 miles for your help with a fevered child, because the entire point of a public execution was not only punishment, it was reassurance. A frightened community needed to watch the danger end. Years later, long after your cottage has gone quiet, Greta walks past it on her way to draw water from the village well. She pauses at the low fence where the herb garden has gone to weeds. On the windowsill, half buried in dust, the chipped clay bowl is still sitting exactly where you left it. She does not go in. She does not speak. She simply stands there a moment longer than she means to, then continues on toward the well, the way she has 100 times since. She never tells anyone what she felt in that pause. Some silences say everything they need to. Historians today, reading trial ledgers centuries later, keep finding the same quiet truth underneath every case. Almost none of it was ever really about magic. It was about a village that could not explain a dead child or a failed harvest, and needed, desperately, for the universe to make sense again, even if making sense of it meant destroying the very woman who had spent her whole life trying to heal it. History remembers the witch trials as a strange and distant superstition, something that happened to people very different from us. It rarely remembers how ordinary fear, grief, and certainty can convince otherwise decent people to destroy someone they once trusted completely.